Peter's Lane, Clerkenwell is a good entry point in today's adventure. I am so excited about today's journey, not just into the past, but beneath the very streets that we walk upon today, into an ancient world buried beneath the streets. Exploring a network of hidden rivers here in Clerkenwell, between here and King's Cross, that talk to us, whispering tales of a bygone era. And it starts just up here by the magnificent St John's Gate. Passing Alley, I've heard, once had a much less polite name in the past. It's very noisy here. Inside the precincts of the Priory of the Order of St John. St John's the Hospitallers. When you walk through that gate behind me, you walk back through time into the Middle Ages, or a world so full of kind of mystery and legend and myth. Of course, the Knights Hospitallers and the Knights of St John, they still exist. But here, stood here now, we're right in the heart of an enormous medieval priory, the Priory of St John. Behind me, St John's Square, you've got this Priory Church over there in the corner. Still the gardens are there, the crypt is there. Established in the 1140s by Jordan de Brisset, a Norman knight who was given 10 acres of land in Clerkenwell to establish the headquarters for an order of knights, the Knights of St John of Jerusalem, as they were then. And this became a real powerhouse in medieval Britain. I've made videos about this before, so I won't go into that whole history. The significance of it for us, though, is that beside the gatehouse there rose a spring that supplied water to the priory. Of course, it was within the inner precinct, and it ran through the outer precinct and down into the River Fleet, a tributary of the River Fleet. And that's what I want to do today. I'm going to mop up, if you like, the final tributaries of the River Fleet that I've not walked before. I've walked a few already. I walked the Western Stream a couple of years ago down there in the City of London. I've walked the Farringdon Brook that runs along Charterhouse Street. A load of motorbikes going by. The challenges of making a video around here. I've also walked the Lamb's Conduit. I walked that almost exactly a year ago. So as far as I'm aware, there are not too many left. There are a few really intriguing ones, including ones I'd never come across before, rising up in Islington. And there's quite a big tributary of the Fleet that runs through Bloomsbury. It runs from Tottenham Court Road through Bloomsbury to King's Cross. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to pick up these little minor whispering streams beneath the ground. I love that idea, whispering underground, whispering us tales of the past. Shall I talk about George Gissing and the Netherworld? George Gissing, writing in the 1870s, writes a story about St John's Square called The Netherworld. And he writes of Samuel Johnson, Dr. Johnson, writing away for the Gentleman's Magazine in the rooms above the gatehouse there. So here is the map of Tudor London. And the stream also appears on the map, the medieval map of London. You can see this is the Great Gate, which is just behind me there. That's the Great Gate there. And you can see just to the west of the Great Gate and slightly forward, you have the beginnings of a little tributary called the Little Torrent. Now, I did set out to walk this one one evening. I shot some stuff on my phone, wondered about the name. Then went home, looked at the map and at layers of London, and here is the name, Little Torrent, a tributary of the Fleet, barely mentioned anywhere, but here it is. So there's the gate, west and slightly forward. I'm placing it here, and this works out as a course. So we'll just stroll, literally just walk the route of the Little Torrent. So we're going down from St John's Square, and this appears to be in the correct location. I've only really found a couple of mentions of the Little Torrent as an actual stream, and it's mentioned as rising inside the inner precinct of the Priory and then running through the outer precinct, which would have been where the barns were. There was a great barn just to basically where this alleyway is, just to the left of this alleyway. This is St John's Path, and then the outer fields where they'd have grown their food before it drops into the River Fleet. And St John's Path really is one of those little fragments of old London where the past comes to life. And I'm pretty sure that this would be the logical place for the Little Torrent to run through, remembering that we rarely build over lost rivers and these little streams. And we emerge from beside the Holy Tavern. It was called the Jerusalem Tavern once upon a time, but I think they've reverted back to its original name. Well, there's a whole debate about that anyway. Into Britain Street, and it's running across the street in front of us. So let's see where we get to, because it's running sort of diagonally across the street. And we're looking for an opening between buildings. Oh no! So I recce'd this during the week, and when I first, well, maybe I'll drop it in actually, the footage I shot, because that's an open gateway, and I'm pretty sure that tallies up with the course of the Little Torrent, but we can go around to the other side. So actually look, so we have an opening between the buildings here into this courtyard, which this seems like was the only break between the buildings until we get to the churchyard on the other side. So I'm pretty sure that the Little Torrent must be flowing beneath the ground, quite a long way down beneath this quite modern building, heading for the River Fleet, the buried River Fleet. Now, as suspected, the entrance into the old churchyard gardens is locked, but during the week this is open. I was so excited that there was a passageway through into the churchyard. And I believe the Little Torrent is running somewhere down through this garden here. I do know a place in Turnmill Street where it was flowing, so we can tally that up on the other side. But when I first set out to find the river, I was so excited that this appeared to be on the course. It's quite interesting actually. I'm still learning about this course, this river, and I thought it ran through the little churchyard there. And actually, what I do know from seeing it on a blog, may have been one by Ian Visits, that it ran through Turk's Head Yard, and that is directly on the other side of this building down below. We'll go down there, but that entrance there, that must be in line with the river. Obviously it's deep beneath the street. I led a walk along the Filly Brook last weekend. It was amazing. Loads of people came, about 30, 35 people came walking through the streets of Leytonstone and Leyton, following our blessed lost river Filly Brook. And sometimes people ask what the fascination is, and it's this. It's these mysteries buried beneath the street. These fragments of the ancient streetscape, older than that gatehouse, of course. When did the springs break up through the ground? When did they first break to the surface? That's how old these living bodies are. I love it. I love it so much. I love it so much. We will walk through St John's Churchyard because it's more pleasant than walking straight down Benjamin Street. But not because I believe it's on the river, but because this is the high banks of the valley of the Fleet in this part of Clerkenwell. Now there used to be a little heritage plaque here talking about the Fleet as the River of Wells and the spring that rose just above this garden, but it seems to have disappeared. And look, there's a plaque here that talks about the course of the Fleet and this garden here, St John's Garden, being on the banks of the Fleet. But here's the important thing for what we're doing here. St John's Garden sits just above a spring line, and its original drinking fountain may well have been served by a natural spring. You can see here's a version of the map that they have at St John's Museum, and that there's the spring, I think, the church and the spring, and now a little stream here. So we emerge into Turnmill Street, an ancient street, goes back in the records to times long gone in the past. There's a wonderful account in the 16th century of 3 women being prosecuted for practicing medicine here in Turnmill Street. And for many years, the name of the River Fleet at this point was the Turnmill Brook. It was only the River Fleet as far as Holborn Bridge, and everything to the north through here up to at least King's Cross was called the Turnmill Brook. Quite distinct from the other sections of the Fleet. It was up here that it was known as the River of Wells. The wells rising on the high ground of Clerkenwell and Islington, running down into the Fleet. Some of which we're going to explore in the next section of this walk. But we're not finished here yet with the Little Torrent. So just through there is Turk's Head Yard, and Ian writes about that being a parish boundary. I think he mentions the stream that ran through there once upon a time. As we know, streams and rivers were often used as parish boundaries. In fact, the Lamb's Conduit, another of the tributaries of the Fleet that we walked last summer, forms a parish boundary as well, and you could follow the Lamb's Conduit by just looking at the boundary markers. So actually, where I'm stood now, I'm stood right on top of the Little Torrent, a tributary of the Fleet. We'll go in here. I don't know if it is a public access place. We might get kicked out. But you never know. So the river will be coming through roughly where that van is parked, or just in front of that van there. And here we are looking down the Little Torrent towards the Fleet. What I find interesting is it aligns with this break. You got one of the entrances to Farringdon Station there, one of the new entrances. And then we have here the railway lines. But I'm imagining that the railway was built over a conduit and that there's no pipes down there like the Westbourne being carried over the tracks of Sloane Square. I imagine it's beneath the railway line. So we'll just walk round to where the Little Torrent could make its confluence with the River Fleet or the Turnmill Brook on Farringdon Road. And then we've got 2 or 3 other little mysterious watercourses to explore. Down there at the building called Well Court, you have the Clerk's Well, the most famous of the Clerkenwell wells, springs I should say, but there were about 8 or 9 of them, and I mentioned that in a video that I made up here last year. Links below and all that jazz. So the Little Torrent would have made its confluence with the River Fleet or the Turnmill Brook somewhere close to where I'm stood now. So that was the Little Torrent. I've wanted to do that for a while. I'm still figuring it out. You can tell there'll be comments of people telling me I've got it wrong, or correcting me, or giving me some brilliant information about where you can hear the Little Torrent. And that's one of the brilliant things about making these videos. Now, another thing to settle, I love this next thing, to settle a long-running dispute. No, it's not a long, I'm exaggerating, but just a question about whether the river you can hear, the water you can hear up here, just off Farringdon Road, is the Fleet, or a tributary, or maybe something else. So just down there where there's that white building, you can see the white building works, they're building the new Museum of London. That's where the Fagswell Brook makes its confluence with the Fleet or the Turnmill Brook. If we just turn here, zoom out, turn up here, and we're looking up Greville Street, and you can hear water here on the slope. You often hear people saying, oh, that's the Fleet. But the Fleet is running along Farringdon Road down here quite clearly. But don't worry, the map of Tudor London explains all. So here beneath this grate, in top of Greville Street, look, there's Greville Street. That is the Fleet running down there. I mean, you can forgive people for thinking that this is the Fleet, because you would, wouldn't you? But actually, the Tudor map shows it very clearly. A channel of water running down. This is Saffron Hill here, which I love, Saffron Hill. It's running between here and the next street, basically where those buildings are. There's a channel of water, it runs down. And then, look, you can hear it. Maybe you can see it. And here it is on the Tudor map. I've got my thumb basically where Greville Street is, and you can see this thick blue kind of course of water running beside an orchard and then down into the Fleet, or the Turnmill Brook, near the Cow Bridge. So we'll walk up Saffron Hill here past the 1 ton. Done a whole video on this area, London's Little Italy. And then we've got a bunch of little tributaries that I didn't even know existed. Really lovely to meet a couple from Sheffield who were walking the River Fleet, and we were stood there over the grate together. I love that. You always meet people walking the Fleet. And also I met a lovely fellow called Jason back there at St John's Gate who saw me with my camera stood there, and he said, he was curious. I think he knew. Really good knowledge of lost rivers himself. Really good knowledge of lost. There's loads of people out there, you know, doing this. It's not just me. This is a geological survey map from the early 20th century. I'll drop it on the screen so it's a bit clearer. But basically there by Mount Pleasant sorting office, where the Fleet meanders round, and where you have the confluence with the Lamb's Conduit, which I walked last summer. You can see there's a branch leading up to Chapel Market. Now some of my more avid viewers will be thinking, hang on a moment, didn't you walk a tributary of the Walbrook that rose near Chapel Market? And I did. But that was a good book I based it on. Stephen Myers, Walking on Water. But it was like, no one places the source, or our source of the Walbrook up there on Chapel Market. The fact that the water flows down into the Fleet from there doesn't exclude there being a tributary up at the Angel for the Walbrook. But this is a lot more likely, is it not? So I have to walk that. That's my old stomping ground. I mean, up here, Saffron Hill, up through Clerkenwell, up through Amwell Street, to the Angel where I used to live. I've got to walk that before we do the final tributary that I'm going to walk today. And I think the final tributary of the Fleet that I haven't walked. Sorry, my own line's going over to my screen there, which takes us from King's Cross to Bloomsbury. But this one, and there's a few other little bits, but I'll leave those to the map to explain. This is a great day out for me, by the way. This is like the perfect Saturday. What I need to do now is buy a really good record to make it the best day ever. It's great to stand up here and look down from the high banks of the valley down into the River Fleet. Actually, I'm not sure if it counts as a tributary, but water that ran into the Fleet ran down here, I believe, down Hatton Wall. I think it was called the King's Ditch. I wish I could remember where I read that. I read it many, many years ago in a book about this area. But yeah, that follows the line of this street here, past the Hat and Tun pub. So we'll drop down here, down Herbal Hill, down into the Fleet as it passes at the bottom of this street here, passing back through time through Little Italy. So we have the Fleet running down here where Ray Street meets Warner Street, and outside the coach there is a great spot to hear the Fleet on the site where this was once known for bear baiting, and all sorts of terrible blood sports were carried out here on the banks of the Fleet. Oh yes, the Fleet is nice and loud today. our tributary is somewhere down there, I believe. Now this is a very, very significant and exciting point here as we stand on the junction of Mount Pleasant and Phoenix Place with Warner Street carrying the River Fleet there. We're basically stood in the middle of like a nexus of watercourses of the River Fleet and various tributaries. It's kind of amazing actually. The Lamb's Conduit is roughly heading in that direction there along Elm Street from Mount Pleasant. And then in Phoenix Place here, it's just like a triangle of water that is crisscrossing with the Fleet. The Fleet is carrying on up Phoenix Place here. So here we have the old Mount Pleasant sorting office, and it stands on the site of Coldbath Fields itself. Then became the site of the Coldbath Prison, and beneath the Coldbath Prison you had at one point the River Fleet running through it, and you had two tributaries at least, the one that we're going to follow up to Chapel Market, then another shorter one that runs down from around Spa Fields, clues in the name all along, wasn't it? Sort of running roughly parallel to Exmouth Market and then flowing into the Fleet roughly here, and then another little watercourse that kind of cuts across, and it's, you know, I'll put the map in to try and illustrate it. It's a really fascinating little nexus, a kind of intricate maze of watercourses. And this manhole cover here is another place where I've heard the River Fleet. In fact, I filmed it in the dark. Bumped into a couple here that were walking it. Interesting actually, you can see it better than you can hear it here. So we need to walk around the sorting office and we can pick up our little tributary on the other side as it ascends the slopes, well, as it descends the slopes from Islington. This is a brand new housing development built on part of the site of the old sorting office, or is it in the car park? I can't remember. For many years the car park was one of the biggest bomb sites in London, if not the biggest. And what we'll call the Spa Fields tributary seems to flow into the Fleet, and then there's another little spring that rises on the other side just here in Calthorpe Street. And just on the other side of these buildings you've got a graveyard, and it's just, or maybe a little bit further over, you have a source that runs down into the Lamb's Conduit Street. The Fleet Walk you can pick up on my channel. I walked the whole thing. Fascinating the way it meanders through these back streets. And I've mentioned the Fleet being the River of Wells, and they have great mythologies connected to them. St Chad's Well, with the battle between King Canute and Edmund Ironside apparently taking place over St Chad's Well. It's great stuff, all that. All in my River Fleet video. It's interesting here to see the way that actually the new development doesn't go over the river. The river is running between these blocks of buildings, I believe, from looking at the maps. And then it crosses King's Cross Road and runs up here along Atneve Street towards Wilmington Square. So it seems to be running sort of diagonally across the top half of Wilmington Square here, and sadly not up Merling Street, then up Margaret Street. But what's interesting is this was there were ducking ponds on these fields here, so maybe the spring fed those ducking ponds. And actually this was the section of Spa Fields that was used for a couple of very significant congregations of members of the Corresponding Society, I believe, people that were calling for greater rights, universal suffrage and all that. And they gathered outside the Merlin's Cave Tavern, which I believe was on the far corner there, where the flats now stand. That is genuinely music to my ears, just as I was wondering where it crosses Marjorie Street, not Margaret Street. Look. That's the loudest watercourse I've heard today. So it's running diagonally behind that block of flats, I guess, where there is that kind of utility building there, and it will cross Amwell Street near the water tower. Well, we'll follow it. Let's do it now. This is the New River Head, the end of the New River, which has travelled down from Hertfordshire, a conduit built in 1613 to bring fresh drinking water into London. All the time, there was a little river fed by a spring in Islington, running just to the north of that tower there, which is clad in white, and across River Street and across Middleton Square. The view up Amwell Street. River Street here, one would always assume, was named after the New River, but perhaps it was named after our little tributary of the Fleet that's cutting across here just near Middleton Square. That is interesting. There's a little street there, that's where it's aligned with, flowing from there, and then passing down this side of Middleton Square, named after Sir Hugh Middleton, who was one of the founders of the New River Company and consequently became unimaginably wealthy. And then it's passing up this side of Claremont Square, and the raised area to our left is the New River Head upper reservoir, and it just crosses over the edge of Claremont Square there, but it's mostly running up this street. Intriguing. It's crossing Pentonville Road just roughly here. It's interesting though, that would put it running through these residential buildings, or maybe it runs through the Doubletree Hotel. It's just to the west of Barron Street, which is where we'll be walking down. We'll have to go along Barron Street. We're at the Angel Islington now. The river is to our left. It's crossing White Lion Street, somewhere down there. Behind the 73 bus. So it's flowing across Chapel Market, somewhere in front of my camera there. And we will pick up the source just around the corner, although the street plan has changed quite a lot. Lovely to meet Charlotte back there, who came and said hello. And shout out to Charlotte and Charlotte's husband Toga. Lovely to meet you, Charlotte, and lovely to meet you kind of virtually, Toga. And I love the way that the guy who took the photograph of us together didn't recognise me until he saw the photograph. He went, "Oh, I know you." It's quite funny, only in 2 dimensions. So we will walk along White Conduit Street, named after the White Conduit which fed the Charterhouse. So that's another watercourse. Hang on a moment, is it? No, it isn't this, but even so. Now then, the fact that the source of this stream is to the west of White Conduit Street makes me think it is a different watercourse to the one that Stephen Myers describes. Because the northern source of the Walbrook that Myers describes in his book, Walking on Water, goes in that direction down Chapel Market and across Liverpool Road. Our stream rises somewhere down here. So our stream rises somewhere in this car park. The streets have changed immeasurably. This was once a network of streets that no longer exist. But it was somewhere south of Penton Street, roughly in line with Maygood Street, and that's kind of to the right of the frame, Maygood Street. So somewhere here in front of the camera is where this branch of the Fleet once rose, this tributary of the Fleet. That's amazing. I love that so much. Of course, I lived up here for a few years. Did I not mention that? So this has got a special resonance for me, this area. And I love the fact now that's twice I've come up here in search of a lost river, and they might be different. Isn't that brilliant? I love that. I love that so much. We've got one more we're going to walk. I think I need to have a little rest for like half an hour, 20 minutes, start again, and that gives us about a good hour to get it done. Yeah. This is a bigger one though. So a quick pint at the Chapel Market Tavern whilst I check Nicholas Barton's The Lost Rivers of London, because he actually mentions this next tributary of the Fleet. next tributary of the Fleet makes its confluence down at King's Cross Station, St Pancras Station I should say, where the River Fleet winds its way around the station. That is just down the bottom of the hill from here, where Blake saw pillars of gold rising in the fields of Marylebone. So we're going to walk down through there, and that's where we'll pick up that walk from. We'll take it from the confluence back to the source. This, by the way, in case you're wondering, I keep talking about Barton without saying it, it's Lost Rivers of London by Nicholas Barton. Really is part of the whole revival of the interest in Lost Rivers. This is published in the 1960s. This edition, by the way, was very kindly gifted to me by somebody at the Hertford Literary Festival. And Barton is describing the course of the Fleet when it reaches this area, which was known as Battle Bridge, with all its legends of Boudica. He says the bridge was of one brick arch over the Fleet, now incorporated in the Fleet sewer. But the battle remains obscure, since the tradition that it was where Boudica was defeated is obviously incompatible with the account of Tacitus. Near here, the Fleet received a tributary from the west, which is shown from forming a pond beside Upper Woburn Place in a picture in the Crace collection. And luckily the Geological Survey map and Barton's own map place the river just here. This is Pancras Way. I mean, I'm stood over the River Fleet here. So it's flowing beneath St Pancras Station, and we'll pick it up on the other side. So the river's emerging from St Pancras Station here across Midland Road, and then it is flowing in this direction, cutting across corner of the British Library, I think, and going down that way there. So we'll go into Maywoodden Street and then Flaxman Street, I think. It's interesting. This is a very interesting route, this. Maywoodden Street. And then I think we're going to be quite dedicated and follow the river beside Mabel's Tavern there, but we have to come back into the little crescent on the other side. A bit of doubling back, but that's to be expected. And here the river is basically following the line of Flaxman Terrace straight ahead. Fascinating little back streets just parallel to the Euston Road. What a great building that is. And already actually this is a great walk to do in its own right, I'd say. We've got Duke's Road, and if I'd left the camera running you would have heard me gasp when I see where the river goes next. One of my favourite little streets in London. This is one of the best little hidden treasures of London. And the river carries on down here, down Woburn Walk. It's a very special memory for me down here, because it's where I went for a meal in the Indian restaurant, just to the left of the frame here. It was the first proper meal I had after my son was born, my first son. I've been living on scraps in the hospital for several days, and then treated myself to a meal in there, an Indian meal, and had a brandy at the end. Woburn Walk is one of the great treasures of London, it really is. And it makes perfect sense that there is a buried river running down the middle of this wonderful little lane. It's exactly where a river god would have a little shop, I think. Or maybe they run the Woburn Tandoori. So as the sign says, we are now in Bloomsbury in Upper Woburn Place, and apparently the stream helped form a pond around here. I don't even really need to look to see where the river carries on by checking the map, because it's really obviously marked out on the landscape. Isn't that magnificent? I love that, absolutely love that. So we'll loop around the top of Tavistock Gardens, because it's a lovely gardens to loop around, and we'll pick up the course on the other side of this enormous building here, Ensley Court. Walking along the top of Tavistock Square here, and the post office tower. There's been a marker on a few walks recently now, hasn't it? I find it quite comforting, actually. Maybe it's like the pivotal point in our recent expeditions. And Tavistock Square just over there, featured in a few videos, and not actually part of this walk. Remember what Ian said, Ian Sinclair, the walk is the walk, and that isn't the walk. Ensley Place here. Lots of the buildings associated with the University of London all around this area. So we turn into Farringdon Street, and the stream is cutting diagonally across the street, heading towards the end there, where it runs along Ensley Gardens, or runs sort of parallel to it. We are here. And the river is kind of working its way up here. Ensley Gardens, where our stream runs beneath the road, or perhaps beneath the pavement to the left. And we continue straight on along Gower Place, moving from University to, University College Hospital, UCH. So the river goes straight across the top of Gower Street, then turns sharply left towards its source. I mean, so you'd have to reverse. I'm walking it in the reverse direction rather than walking it to the confluence. I think I often do things in the reverse direction, don't I? That's kind of my thing. So the source is very nearby. We're walking down Grafton Way here, or Grafton Way, whichever way you prefer to pronounce it. And then we'll turn into Huntley Street, and the source is somewhere there, I think. So we've turned left into Huntley Street, and the river is running to our right somewhere, either beneath the street or beneath the building. I'd be tending to think it's beneath the street, personally. So turning into University Street, the spring rises, or the tributary rises just somewhere here. I mean, either on the pavement or in the middle of the road. And actually to the right of the frame, I think I can see the point where it emerges, which is quite thrilling. I was trying to gauge where the river rises and where it crosses University Street by the Geological Survey map, but then there's this here, look. That's the corner of Huntley Street and University Street there. And look, you've got this gap here between the buildings, which must be where this little unnamed, as far as I can tell, tributary of the Fleet makes its journey, and its source is somewhere here. Could it be those manhole covers over there? It'll do for us, I reckon. I'm going to have this as the source of our tributary. What's it called? It's got to have a name. If the Little Torrent has a name, it's just a little tiny rivulet, this one must have a name, surely. Someone will know in the comments, I guarantee it. That was amazing. That was really amazing. And what I love as well, when I was going to film that bit behind me, this fella just ducked in there and relieved himself behind the bins. So I waited for him to finish. I went, don't worry, mate, I'll wait for you. And as he came out, I went, when you got to go, you got to go. What an amazing walk. Thank you for coming on that exploration of what I think are the final tributaries of the River Fleet that I haven't yet filmed. I thought this video would be quite short and I would put in all the other tributaries that I filmed into one video. I think it's going to be longer than I thought it was going to be, so I'll link below to the videos that contain walks along the other tributaries of the Fleet. If you know of others, please let me know. I would love to hear of them. If you know of any names, for example, of this one here, or that one that runs down sort of near Saffron Hill into the Fleet, or the one that rises in Islington and comes on down. This is what I live for. I love this stuff. So thanks once again. Thanks to my wonderful supporters on Patreon and the YouTube members, and to you for coming in each week, coming along here to wherever you watch and watching these videos. It's really, really wonderful. And the wonderful people I met along the way today. What a day. So as I always like to say, I look forward to seeing you in the next walk, wherever that may be. And the new river just gets nearer and nearer and nearer. We keep hovering around it, don't we? When will it be?
It's over the meadow, over the stream, it's where I am going and where I have been. It's been a long day now, it's time for a beer, and now for home, of course I must steer. It's over the meadow,